It was an ordinary morning on Earth, with the sun rising over the horizon and the world beginning its usual routine. People went about their business, unaware of the great danger approaching. For years, Earth had been just another planet in the vast galaxy, ignored and left alone by the many alien species who roamed the stars. But that was about to change. Out in the deep reaches of space, a race of alien invaders called the Korthans had set their eyes on Earth. The Korthans were known for their advanced technology and ruthless ways. They had conquered many planets before, destroying anyone who stood in their way. But they had never faced Earth. They had never faced humans. And they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The Korthans had been planning their invasion for years, studying Earth from a distance. They believed the planet was weak, primitive, and full of resources that they could take without much trouble. They had watched from afar as humans fought wars among themselves, struggled with diseases, and barely managed to survive in their own chaotic world. The Korthans thought it would be easy to take over. They were wrong. As the first wave of Korthan ships arrived, their enormous vessels filled the skies, blocking out the sun. The ships were massive, built for war and bristling with weapons. Each ship was capable of destroying entire cities in a single strike. The Korthans had come to claim Earth as their own, but the humans were not prepared to give up without a fight. In a small town in Texas, a young man named Jake Thomas was working in his garage on a drone he had been building for months. Jake was a quiet and thoughtful person, always tinkering with things, trying to understand how they worked. He wasn't someone who would usually be in the middle of a conflict, but he would soon find himself playing a key role in the fight for Earth's survival. Jake had been working late that night, his hands covered in grease as he adjusted the delicate parts of his drone. He had always been interested in technology ever since he was a child. His father had been a mechanic, and Jake had spent many hours in his father's workshop, learning how to fix and build things. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. As Jake was adjusting the drone's antenna, a bright flash of light filled the sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. At first, he thought it was just a strange weather phenomenon. But as the light grew brighter and brighter, he realized that something was wrong. Looking up, he saw what no one could have expected: a fleet of massive alien ships descending from the sky, blocking out the stars and the sun. Jake's heart raced as he stood frozen in place. He had heard rumors of alien life, of far-off races that traveled the stars, but he never imagined he would see them himself. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen, dark and imposing, their surfaces smooth and featureless. They seemed to hover in the sky without a sound, as though they were waiting for something. The ships began to lower, getting closer and closer to the ground. Jake quickly ran to the house to warn his family. He rushed inside and found his mother, Mary, sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up, startled as Jake burst through the door. "Mom, you need to see this," Jake said, his voice shaky. Mary stood up quickly, sensing the urgency in her son's voice. She followed him outside, and together they stood in their yard, staring up at the sky in shock. Jake's younger sister, Emma, came outside as well, looking confused but frightened. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake didn't have an answer. He could only stare at the ships that now filled the sky. They were so close that he could make out the strange symbols on their hulls, symbols that no human could understand. The ships began to glow with a strange, pulsing light, and then, without warning, a blast of energy shot out from the lead ship, striking the ground with incredible force. The explosion was deafening, and the shockwave sent the family tumbling to the ground. "Get inside," Jake shouted, pulling his family to their feet. They rushed back inside the house, hearts pounding with fear. Jake looked out the window and saw the ships continuing their descent. He could see now that there were dozens of them, all hovering above the town, their weapons aimed at the ground. "This is it," Jake muttered to himself. "They're here." As the Korthon ships began to open fire on the town, Jake knew they couldn't just sit and wait to be destroyed. He had to do something. He didn't know what, but he couldn't just stand by while his home was attacked. There was a feeling deep inside him, a feeling that humans were capable of more than the aliens thought. It wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about something greater. "I need to get to my workshop," Jake said, his voice determined. His mother looked at him, worried. "Jake, what are you going to do? We can't fight them." Jake didn't answer right away. He turned to Emma, his younger sister. "Emma, take Mom and stay in the basement. Don't come out until I say it's safe. Understand?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched her mother's hand. Together they hurried to the basement. Jake ran back outside, heading for the workshop in the back of the yard. He had been building drones for fun, but now he saw their potential. If he could modify them, make them stronger, they might be able to fight back. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. Inside the workshop, Jake quickly gathered his tools. He knew that time was running out. The Korthons were already attacking the town, and soon they would move on to the next one. He had to work fast. As Jake worked, he could hear the sounds of explosions in the distance. The ground shook with every blast. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had to do something. The world was depending on him. It was then that Jake realized something important. Humans had one thing. The Korthons didn't: determination. While the aliens might have advanced technology, they didn't understand the strength of the human spirit. Jake wasn't just building a drone. He was building a weapon for survival. And it was just the beginning. Jake had never been in a situation like this before. As the world around him fell into chaos, he worked quickly in his small workshop, his mind racing. The air outside was thick with the sound of explosions and the rumble of the Korthon ships. He could feel the ground shaking beneath his feet with each blast, and his thoughts were clear. He had to do something. He couldn't let his family, his town, or the entire planet fall without trying. The workshop was filled with tools, parts, and machines. For years, Jake had built small robots, drones, and gadgets. It was something he did in his free time, a way to escape from the world and dive into something he loved. But today, those drones had become something more. They weren't just toys anymore. They were his last hope. Jake knew he wasn't the only one who had to fight back. People across the world would be facing the same terror. The Korthons were everywhere. But Jake had something they didn't expect: ingenuity. He didn't have advanced alien technology, but he had his skills. He had his mind. He grabbed a small drone from his workbench, an old model he had been modifying for months. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jake connected it to a computer and started typing quickly, his fingers moving fast. He didn't have much time. The Korthons were already attacking nearby cities. He could hear the blasts getting louder, the sounds of people screaming and running. His mind focused on the task at hand. Jake worked to improve the drone's design. He knew it wasn't going to be able to take down the alien ships by itself. But if he could make it strong enough, it could be part of the solution. He connected a small weapon to the drone, a laser he had built from spare parts. It wasn't a big weapon, but it could be useful. Outside, the sky was lit up with flashes of light. The Korthon ships were firing on the ground. Jake looked up from his work, watching as one of the ships fired a beam of energy at a nearby building. The building exploded into flames, and people ran in every direction, trying to escape. The fear was overwhelming. Jake knew that without a plan, without something to fight back, it would all be over. But he couldn't let that happen. He had to believe that humans could do more. They had fought through so much in their history: wars, famines, and countless challenges. Now, they were facing their greatest threat, and Jake knew that if anyone could find a way to survive, it would be humanity. It was in their nature. Jake grabbed his laptop and began searching for anything that could help. The Korthons were using advanced technology, but they weren't invincible. They had to have weaknesses. Everything had a weakness, even the most powerful machines. Jake just needed to find it. He pulled up satellite images of the Korthon fleet. The ships were enormous, their dark shapes blotting out the sky. He zoomed in on the largest ship, a massive craft that seemed to be the leader of the fleet. It was surrounded by smaller ships, all of them firing on the ground below. But Jake noticed something strange. The smaller ships seemed to be moving in a pattern, a set formation. It was almost like they were following commands from the large ship. Jake's eyes narrowed. He had found something. The larger ship was controlling the others. If he could disrupt that, If he could break the command structure, maybe the smaller ships would lose their coordination. The Korthons relied heavily on their fleet's organization. If that was taken away, it could give the humans a chance. His heart raced as he thought of a plan. He had the skills to hack into the Korthon systems. He had done it before, though only in small ways, testing the limits of his technology. But this was different. This was a fight for survival. Jake wasn't just tinkering with machines anymore. He was about to take on an alien fleet. He pulled up the Korthon ship's communication network, using a backdoor he had created in his software. It took a few minutes to crack the code, but Jake was patient. He had worked on more difficult projects before. He didn't stop until he had access. When he did, he could see at the central hub, the control system for the entire fleet. Jake wasn't sure how long he had before the Korthons noticed him, but he knew he couldn't waste time. He uploaded a virus into the system, a program designed to disrupt their communications and break their control over the smaller ships. If it worked, the Korthons would lose their ability to direct the fleet. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was the best chance he had. Jake held his breath as the virus made its way into the Korthon system. It was a risk, a huge risk, but there was no turning back now. He watched the screen as the virus began to spread, causing the ships to wobble, their movements growing erratic. The larger ships' commands were no longer being followed. The smaller ships began to veer off course, some crashing into each other, others floating aimlessly in the sky. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Korthon fleet, once a terrifying, unstoppable force, was now in disarray. It was working. The virus was working. He quickly sent the command to the drone he had built, launching it into the air. It flew out of the workshop and into the sky, ready to join the fight. The drone flew toward the Korthon fleet, dodging explosions and debris as it went. Jake had no idea what would happen next. The aliens were powerful and the fight was far from over. But for the first time since the invasion began, Jake felt a spark of hope. The Korthons had made a mistake. They had underestimated humans. And that, Jake realized, was their greatest mistake. As the drone approached the alien ships, Jake watched from the ground, hoping that his small invention could make a difference. It was just the beginning, but Jake knew this was only the start of something much bigger. He wasn't alone. All over the world, people were fighting back, using their skills, their intelligence, and their courage to stand up to the invaders. The Korthons might have had advanced technology, but they didn't understand humanity. They didn't understand what made humans special. They didn't understand that humans would fight for their home, for their families, and for each other. The fight was far from over, but Jake knew one thing for sure. Earth wasn't going down without a fight. Jake stood there, staring at the sky, his heart racing. The drone he had sent into the air was flying toward the Korthon ships. And for the first time since the invasion began, Jake felt a small spark of hope. The Korthons had underestimated humanity, and now they were starting to feel the effects of their mistake. The virus he had uploaded into their system had done its job. The alien fleet was in disarray. The smaller ships were no longer following the commands of the larger ship, and many of them were crashing into each other, losing their coordinated attacks. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Korthons were still a powerful enemy, and Jake knew that one small victory wouldn't be enough to stop them. As the drone flew closer to the alien ships, Jake could hear the sounds of explosions in the distance. The war was raging all around him. He could feel the ground shaking with each blast. The Korthons were attacking every city they could reach, and there was no telling how many lives had already been lost. People were running for cover, trying to escape the destruction, but the aliens had come prepared. Their weapons were far more advanced than anything humanity had. Jake looked at the screen of his laptop, where he could see the drone's camera feed. The small machine was flying through the chaos, weaving between explosions and falling debris. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a way for Jake to fight back, to do something when everything seemed so hopeless. His fingers trembled as he typed commands into the keyboard. The drone was getting closer to the lead Korthon ship. He had no idea what would happen when it reached the ship, but he had to try. The alien fleet was huge, and there were no guarantees. But Jake refused to give up. He refused to let the Korthons destroy everything. Back in the town, the sounds of war were all around. The Korthons had landed their forces and were marching through the streets, their weapons firing at anything that moved. The humans had tried to fight back, but the alien technology was too advanced. People had taken to the streets with whatever weapons they could find: rifles, homemade bombs, anything they could use to protect their homes. But it was clear that the Korthons were a force like no other. Their ships hovered above the streets, firing lasers that turned buildings into rubble. In the midst of all this destruction, Jake's family had taken shelter in the basement. His mother, Mary, was trying to keep Emma calm as the sounds of the attack echoed through the walls. Emma, her face pale with fear, clutched her mother's hand. She had never seen anything like this before. The world she knew was gone, replaced by chaos and terror. "We have to stay here, Emma," Mary said softly, her voice shaking. "We'll be safe down here." But Emma didn't feel safe. She could hear the screams of people outside, and she could feel the tremors of the explosions. The fear was overwhelming. She wanted to do something to help in some way, but there was nothing she could do. Her brother Jake had gone to the workshop, and she had no idea what he was doing, but she trusted him. He was smart, and he had always found a way to fix things, to make things work. Maybe he was doing the same now. As the hours passed, the sounds of the battle grew louder. The Korthon forces were relentless. But Jake was still working, still fighting back in his own way. He knew that the battle was far from over, but he also knew that if they didn't stand up, the Korthons would win. He couldn't let that happen. The drone was now hovering near the Korthon flagship, just beneath its massive hull. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared the next part of the plan. He had one shot at this. The Korthon ship was heavily protected, with a shield that made it nearly invincible. But Jake had an idea. If he could overload the ship's power system, he could disable its shield and give the humans a fighting chance. He tapped furiously on the keyboard, typing out the code that would send a surge of energy into the flagship's power core. It was risky, and there was no guarantee it would work. But if it did, the Korthons would lose their shield, and the humans would have a better chance of fighting back. Jake's fingers flew over the keys, and with one final command, he sent the signal. The drone's camera feed flickered as it approached the power core. The Korthon ship was massive, its dark surface covered with strange symbols and markings. The ship's power core was located in the center, surrounded by layers of armor and defense systems. But Jake had found a way to hack into it, to send the surge of energy that would disable the ship's shield. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake held his breath, staring at the screen. The drone was getting closer to the power core, its tiny frame dwarfed by the enormous ship. Then, without warning, the screen flashed. The ship's shield began to flicker, its energy levels spiking and then collapsing. The Korthon flagship was now vulnerable. Jake grinned, his heart racing. The ship's shield had failed. This was the opening the humans needed. The Korthons had made a mistake. They had thought they could crush humanity, but they had underestimated the power of the human mind, the human will to survive. But there was no time to celebrate. The Korthons would soon realize what had happened, and they would retaliate. Jake quickly sent a signal to the drone, guiding it away from the flagship as the Korthon ships began to respond. The battle was about to escalate, but Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The Korthons had made a mistake. Now humanity had a chance to fight back. Jake closed his laptop and ran to the door, his heart pounding with excitement. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Jake felt like they had a real chance. The Korthons had thought they could take Earth easily, but now they were learning that humans were not so easily defeated. Jake wasn't alone in this fight. All over the world, people were rising up, using their skills, their brains, and their courage to fight back. It was only a matter of time before the tide turned. The war was not over, but the first step had been taken. Jake had made a difference, and that difference would echo across the galaxy. Jake sat back, staring at his laptop screen. His heart was still racing. The plan had worked. The Korthon flagship's shield had failed, and now the aliens were scrambling. But the fight was far from over. He knew this was just the beginning. The Korthons were powerful, and they wouldn't give up easily. They had underestimated humanity. But they would learn quickly not to make that mistake again. Jake could see the chaos unfolding around him. The Korthons had been thrown off balance, but they weren't about to let a small human victory stop them. They had already begun firing on the ground again, sending waves of energy blasts at the cities below. The destruction was massive. Buildings crumbled, and the streets were filled with smoke and dust. The Korthons were relentless, but Jake wasn't just going to sit back and watch. He knew there was more to do. His drone had made a small difference, but it wasn't enough. The humans needed to fight back with everything they had. Jake thought of his family, safe in the basement. They were scared, just like everyone else. But he had to believe that they would survive. They had to. He quickly packed up his laptop and grabbed a few tools. There was no time to waste. The Korthons would soon realize the flaw in their ship's shield, and they would find a way to fix it. Jake needed to keep them off balance, keep them distracted long enough for humanity to regroup and launch a real counterattack. As he ran out of the workshop, the sounds of the battle outside were deafening. The ground shook beneath his feet as another explosion rocked the town. The sky was filled with smoke, and the air smelled like burning metal. Jake's heart pounded, but he pushed his fear aside. He had a plan. He made his way toward the local radio tower, hoping that he could use it to send a signal to other resistance groups across the country. There had to be other people fighting back. Jake couldn't do this alone. If he could get the radio tower online, maybe he could help organize the resistance. He couldn't waste any more time. When he reached the tower, he quickly got to work. The building was damaged, and the power was out, but Jake knew how to fix it. He connected his laptop to the tower's emergency power supply and began typing in commands to bring the system back online. It took a few minutes, but soon the radio tower hummed to life. Jake adjusted the frequency and started sending out a message. He didn't know who would hear it, but he had to try. He spoke quickly, his voice filled with urgency. "People of Earth, this is Jake Thomas. We're fighting back. The Korthons have underestimated us. We can win this. We need your help. If you're out there, if you're still standing, fight. The Korthons are powerful, but we are stronger together. We can do this." He repeated the message over and over, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear it. As he spoke, he could hear the sounds of more explosions in the distance. The Korthons were closing in. Time was running out, but Jake didn't stop. He kept sending the message, hoping that it would reach someone who could help. He couldn't do this alone. The resistance needed to grow. The humans needed to unite. Back in the town, the Korthon forces were closing in on the last pockets of resistance. The military had fought bravely, but their weapons were no match for the Korthon ships. General Turner had done everything he could to organize the defense, but even he knew they were losing the fight. The Korthons had too many ships, too many weapons. But that didn't stop the soldiers. They fought on, even when the odds were against them. General Turner stood in the middle of the command center, his face grim as he looked at the map of the town. The Korthons had already taken control of most of the area. Their ships hovered above the city, firing energy blasts that turned buildings into rubble. The military had tried to hold them off, but it was clear that they couldn't win. But Turner wasn't about to give up. He gathered his officers together and made a decision. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll fight to the last man. We'll hit them where it hurts. We'll make them regret underestimating us." The officers nodded, and the plan was set. The remaining soldiers would use guerrilla tactics, striking the Korthon forces in small, unexpected ways. They would attack from the shadows, disrupt the alien operations, and buy time for the rest of the world to organize. It wasn't much, but it was something. Turner knew that if they didn't fight back now, they would never have another chance. The Korthons were powerful, but they didn't understand humanity. They didn't understand that humans would keep fighting no matter the odds, as the soldiers prepared for the next assault. Turner's mind turned to Jake. The young engineer had done something incredible. He had found a way to disrupt the Korthon fleet. He had given the humans a chance. Turner didn't know how many people had heard Jake's message, but he knew one thing. They couldn't stop now. The Korthons had made a mistake. They were going to pay for it. Jake continued to send the message, hoping that someone, somewhere, would hear it. He didn't know how much time he had, but he knew that every second counted. The Korthons were coming, and the humans had to be ready. As he finished his last message, heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Sam and Emma, both of them looking out of breath but determined. "We heard your message," Sam said, his voice full of hope. "We're with you. Let's finish this." Jake smiled. For the first time since the invasion began, he felt like they had a real chance. The Korthons had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to learn the consequences of that mistake. Together, they would fight back. Together, they would win. The war was far from over, but the first steps had been taken. The Korthons had made their move, and now it was time for the humans to make theirs. Jake turned to face the sky, where the Korthon ships still hovered. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide was starting to turn. The humans were ready, and they would fight until the very end. The night felt heavy with tension. The sounds of war still echoed through the air, and Jake's heart was racing. The Korthon fleet was not just a few ships. It was massive. The alien ships hovered above the city, their dark forms blocking out the stars. The fighting had been brutal, and the damage to the town was unimaginable. But Jake, Sam, Emma, and the others had not given up. They were still standing. They were still fighting. Jake had made a promise to himself and to his family that he wouldn't let Earth, all without doing everything he could. He had done something small, something that had given the humans a chance. But now, the battle was only getting more intense. The Korthons were learning from their mistakes, and they would fight harder. The humans had to fight harder too. Jake stood outside, watching as the Korthon ships fired on the town again. The sound of the blasts was deafening, and the ground shook with each strike. He could see the soldiers in the distance, moving through the smoke and rubble, trying to strike back against the invaders. The Korthons were relentless, but the humans were showing something the aliens had never expected: determination. Jake felt it too. There was something in his chest, something that told him they were going to win. They had to. Sam walked over to Jake, his face covered in dirt and sweat. He looked exhausted but determined. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low. "The Korthons aren't going to stop. We have to hit them where it hurts." Jake nodded. "I know. I've been thinking about it. We need to take out their main control ship. If we can do that, it'll break their command. The smaller ships won't be able to do anything without orders." Sam's eyes lit up. "That's a good idea. But it won't be easy. That ship is huge, and it's heavily protected. We'll need help." Jake looked at Emma, who was standing nearby, looking scared but determined. He had never seen his sister so strong, so brave. She had always been the one to stay out of trouble, to avoid danger. But now, she was ready to fight. "We have to do this together," Jake said to Sam and Emma. "We can't let them win. Not after everything we've been through." The three of them set off toward the center of the town, where the Korthon command ship hovered just above. It was massive, towering over the buildings, its dark surface gleaming in the light of the explosions below. Jake could feel the fear in his chest, but he pushed it aside. They had no choice. If they didn't do this, Earth would fall. They made their way through the wreckage of the city, dodging blasts and falling debris. Every step they took brought them closer to the Korthon ship, but it also brought them closer to danger. The Korthons were still patrolling the streets, searching for any humans to capture or destroy. The humans fought back whenever they could, but it was clear that the Korthons had far more advanced weapons. As they approached the base of the Korthon ship, Jake could feel the heat from the blasts growing stronger. The ship seemed to pulse with energy, and Jake knew they didn't have much time. They needed to move quickly. He checked the small device he had built to disrupt the Korthon ship's systems. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. Jake, Sam, and Emma climbed up a pile of rubble, using it to get closer to the ship. From here, they could see the entrance to the ship's control room. It was guarded by two Korthon soldiers, their bodies towering and covered in armor. They looked almost invincible. But Jake wasn't afraid. He knew that humans had a power the Korthons didn't understand, the ability to adapt. To fight back no matter the odds, we'll need a distraction, Jake whispered. Sam, you take the left. Emma, you're with me. We'll hit them from both sides. Sam nodded and moved into position. Jake and Emma quietly moved around the other side, careful not to make a sound. They couldn't afford to get caught. If they did, everything would be over. They had to move fast. Jake looked at Emma, her face full of fear but also full of courage. She was ready. They both knew what had to be done. With a signal from Jake, Sam threw a rock in the opposite direction, creating a loud noise. The Korthons turned their heads, giving Jake and Emma the chance they needed. They ran forward, using the cover of the rubble to get close. Emma pulled a small makeshift weapon from her bag of small, its powerful electric stun gun, aimed it at the nearest Korthon soldier. The soldier didn't even see her coming. With a quick zap, the soldier fell to the ground, unconscious. The other soldier turned, but before he could react, Sam lunged at him. Knocking the weapon out of his hand and taking him down with a swift move, Jake rushed to the door of the control room. He could feel his hands shaking, but he couldn't stop now. He had to finish what he started. He inserted the device into the control panel, and within moments the Korthon ship's systems began to flicker. Lights dimmed, and the hum of the engines slowed. It's working, Jake muttered under his breath. It's working. The control ship's shield began to fade, and the smaller Korthon ships in the air above began to falter. They couldn't fly without the main ship's commands. They began to drift aimlessly, crashing into each other and losing their ability to attack. Jake, Sam, and Emma didn't wait to see what happened next. They knew the Korthons would try to fix the problem, but for now, they had a window of opportunity. They ran back into the shadows, careful not to be seen. The Korthons were not defeated, but they were losing control. As they ran back toward the town, Jake looked up at the sky. The Korthon fleet, once so powerful, was now falling apart. The smaller ships were crashing, and the larger ship was starting to lose altitude. The tide was turning. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time since the invasion began, Jake felt a sense of hope. Humanity wasn't giving up. The Korthons had underestimated them. And now they were learning the hard way. The fight for Earth was far from over, but the humans had shown their strength. The Korthons might have had the weapons, but the humans had the will to survive. And that, Jake knew, was the one thing the Korthons could never understand. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Jake, Sam, and Emma made their way back to the resistance camp. They had done it. They had taken the first real step toward victory. The Korthons might have thought they could icily take Earth, but they were wrong. Humans were not so icily defeated, and they would fight to the end.